You're someone with a vision for your practice, for your side hustle, and for your personal journey. But when it comes to establishing your path on how to get to where you want to be with your practice, things get a little messy. You're also someone who'd prefer to go in person instead of to groups and listening to everyone else's story. To me, it sounds like you could benefit from one on one consulting with our experienced practice of the practice consultants. From $5.95 a month and up, you can work with a consultant that will give you more direction and practical, tried and tested tips matched to you and your goals. For more information, visit practiceofthepractice.com/apply. Again, that's practiceofthepractice.com/apply. This is the Practice of the Practice podcast with Joe Sanok, session number 1233. I'm Joe Sanok, your host, and welcome to the Practice of the Practice podcast. Now, we have been just doing some awesome episodes recently. Our team kind of scrambled things up from how I recorded it. So if you heard something where I said, oh, in May we did this, and then you're like, that was in April. They've been really kind of testing some different ways of doing it, where we have different themes on different days of the week. So like Mindfulness Tuesdays, Productivity Wednesdays. I see in these HPM is going to be what our Mondays are, I think. And I imagine that stands for something, but my team will tell me what to say about it. But we've had some really exciting things. So back in March, we had our Brighter Brains series. In April, we had the Future of series. So we talked about like the future of trust and learning. We talked about marketing and marketing a private practice, all sorts of really just interesting things over the spring and early summer. And to me, it's always exciting to hang out with people that are in this field in a way that's similar to me. So many of the episodes that I record are with people that are definitely not in the private practice space and, often not in our consulting space. And I'm kind of trying to figure out like what's the lens to bring it into private practice. But today I have Kelley Stevens with me, and Kelley is a private practice consultant, adjunct professor, and practicing LMFT in California. Kelley teaches therapists how to launch, fill, and scale cash pay therapy practices with over 2,000 therapists in her programs. Kelley is known for breaking down private practice into simple, actionable steps. You can learn more about Private Practice Pro over at theprivatepracticepro.com. Kelley, welcome to the Practice of Practice podcast.
Thank you. I'm totally having a fan moment over here. I'm a longtime listener of the podcast, and I'm just so excited to be here.
Oh, I'm so excited to have you. I mean, to me, like that never gets old. Hearing that people have somehow taken time out of their life to listen to this guy's voice from Northern Michigan.
Yeah, I always feel like podcast is one of those things where, different than other social media platforms, you are really with people during their real life. Like I'm listening while I'm cooking or driving or with my kids versus, somebody being on their phone swiping through videos. I think it's a much more kind of intimate, I want to say friendship, but it's one-sided, right? Because we're listening to you. But
oh yeah, I mean, I remember when I first got into Pat Flynn's Smart Passive Income podcast, and I mean, I would listen to it while I was like running, back when I ran, when I was mowing the lawn, when I was doing all sorts of things, and I started having dreams about Pat Flynn, and I'm just like, this is like too, because I remember in an episode he said how he loves flip flops and bacon, and I'm like, I love flip flops and bacon. And it's like when I finally had him on the episode, I'm like, I got to tell you something super creepy. And I'm like, this is so weird. And I like had dreams about you, and it's just like when someone's in your brain that much, it's just like, yeah, you're thinking about like how would that person do it, and we all have our folks that we look up to. So thanks for telling me that I've been a little bit of your journey.
100%. Yeah, no, I think that there are podcasts that are like no longer on anymore from years ago that I still think about. So I agree with you.
Yeah. Well, today we started talking. I almost always ask my guests beforehand, like, what are you excited to talk about? What are you sick of talking about? And the amount of different things that we could talk about is vast. And I thought, well, let's just have a conversation about private practice and we'll just see where it goes. When you think about what you're seeing in your programs from people that are starting cash pay practices, like, are there any shifts you're seeing, at the time of this recording is 2025, anything maybe since like 2020, any shifts you've seen that seems to be like how things are being done now?
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's been very interesting post pandemic. We're 5 years out, which I cannot even believe, from the 2020 whatever it was, right? So much. Um, and I think the thing I'm noticing in many ways is we saw therapists make this huge pivot, right? During the pandemic, we got into telehealth. A lot of therapists learned to promote themselves online. Social media became much more um, accepted. I know, like when I was in school, a lot of people are like, no, you can't be a therapist on social media. And now, um, obviously, we see tons of therapists on social media. But what I've also noticed is some burnout from people, saying like, oh, you know what, I've grown this following, I've grown whatever. And yes, it's bringing me some clients into my practice, but it feels less connected. And I'm seeing people kind of move back toward do more in-person marketing, being more in their community, writing for the local newspaper, taking lunch to school counselors and that sort of thing. So I don't know. I'm wondering, are you seeing the same thing, Joe, where you feel like people are going back toward more organic marketing, or are you seeing more online?
It's interesting. I think that online it's shifted, where I think there's basics like having decent SEO,
Yeah.
having some sort of presence with like your Google business, and hopefully having more than just like, one review on your Google business, kind of those things that are maybe more like standard infrastructure.
Right.
I do think that it's really, really hard to get clients off of social media.
Yeah.
Unless you're like really, really specific, putting a lot of time into it, where you're doing something that's very specific to your niche and then also your state. And then also if you take insurances, like,
Mhm.
I think that the time that it takes to grow a legitimate following where you're actually getting people to come in could be better spent in quite a few other areas.
Yeah, I agree with you. The way I kind of think about it is, and I agree with you, like there's those like kind of bread and butter things. Like you need a good big Google My Business profile. You need a good website. You need really good search engine optimization. And I think of those as like the baseline. But yeah, when it comes to social media, I often will tell people, I think that there's kind of two ways to approach it, right? You're either trying to grow your practice or you're trying to grow a digital brand. And a digital brand might sell workbooks and courses and uh, maybe some workshops or live trainings. And your practice is what I think of as either your telehealth or your brick and mortar. And the way you're going to market those two things is going to be really different. And I think social media can be a great place to do that digital brand. And I think for some people it can be a great place to fill their practice too. But what I see happen is when people think like, oh, I'm going to do it all on this one place. And then they kind of, spread themselves a little too thin, is what I think happens a lot. Not always, but a
Yeah.
lot.
I think it's when people decide like, "Oh, I think I wanna do some consulting with other people in town that
Mhm.
own practices because my friends keep asking me," and then they just add a tab to their counseling website that says, like, "consulting." It's just
Yeah,
confusing because the ideal client that's coming to your website is saying, "I'm fighting with my partner and I want therapy." And the person
right.
that's coming for consulting is like, "I need to know how to have insurances accept my billing." And it's like just two completely
Absolutely.
different things. So it just doesn't tend to work.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And, I saw this happen for me. So, I work with teenagers. I've worked with teenagers for years and obviously spent years working on my own SEO, building my practice, building my reputation just for that before I ever started working consulting for therapists. And eventually I learned that lesson the hard way and separated every single thing out. So if somebody were looking for me for consulting, it's going to be really different if they were looking for me for therapy. But that took a lot of backtracking, and my team and I had to really get creative about how we were going to do that. And so I completely agree with you.
Yeah. Now, I'm wondering, so you primarily focus on helping cash pay practices. What do you see happening in the cash pay world?
Yeah, it's interesting. So, what I have found working with cash pay practice, and primarily the reason I have focused more on cash pay practice is I teach a lot of marketing for therapists and a lot of how do you get clients. And so I've kind of niched down to working with cash pay practices because certainly I think it's harder. If you're not getting clients sent from insurance companies, you have to get a little bit more creative. So the question I get the most, and I'm curious if you get this question too, is like, is it too saturated? Are there too many other cash pay therapists? Or, depending on where I'm located, what can I do to get more referrals? Is it going to be different in one part of the country? Is it or than another? And all of those things are, of course, right? There's always going to be differences. But I think the more important question when we're working with cash pay therapists is like, what's your niche? Are you, which the term niche, okay, gets thrown around all the time, but I see it more and more often. If you're going to be a specialist and you're going to bill out of network, the importance of really being known for something specific is much more important than if you were an insurance-based practice. So that's what I'm seeing, and that's what I'm really trying to help people do, is get a lot more clear on who they serve so that they can attract more specific clients into their cash pay practices.
Yeah, 100%. I think that another question that I ask people when they say, well, is it saturated, is I'll say, well, do you think that every person that can afford private pay therapy that needs therapy is going to therapy? And they'll say, no, of course not. It's like, okay, so the market is not saturated. If everyone that needs therapy that could afford it was in therapy, then we'd have to say, well, we have to differentiate even more. So I think that's one way to think of it. And then also, kind of with what you were saying about niching in, like I think about, my healthcare plan covers my primary care doctor. My physicals paid at 100%. Lab tests are, I don't know, whatever they are, not terribly expensive. My prescriptions are not terribly expensive. But yet I put my own money into some supplements that to me make me feel better. I have, green tea matcha every morning. I, do things that make my health feel better above and beyond what's covered by my insurance. Now, if my health insurance covered my favorite matcha and covered my favorite collagen and covered all of my my supplements that I want to do, would I just not use my insurance for that? Like, of course I would. And so it's like, if you just help people with trauma or anxiety, and you're just another one of those Psychology Today counselors, why would someone ever not use their insurance if you don't differentiate yourself? And so I think to your
Right.
point, you have to stand out if you're going to be private pay, to really make sure that there's a reason why people still want to come to you and that you're known as being really great in a specific area.
Absolutely. I think about even just like in my specialty of working with teens, one thing I've really noticed too is kind of this idea that like parents, I don't know, you have kids, obviously. Like sometimes I think like I'm so much more willing to spend the money on a specialist for my children. And I often will tell therapists who see kids and teens, and obviously this doesn't only apply, obviously if you're a specialist that works with adults, but I think also if you're in the world of working with kids, a lot of parents are willing to go out of network that's for somebody who really specializes in working with kids, because certainly not everybody does. And I
Yeah.
like to remind people of that too.
Well, I think there's also a lot of emerging companies that are helping with the out of network benefits and taking a small percentage of what's recouped. And so it's not like it used to be where you just do a super bill. There's so many great options that are out there now. I want to
Yeah.
shift into when you think about private practice growth, when you think about marketing, AI, where people should be spending their time. What for you is the most effective use of time if people want to grow their private practices?
Interesting. Okay. I've thought a lot about this because the question I get the most is, should I grow into a group? So let's say, somebody has gotten to the point where their practice is full and they do want to make more income. Then, I think the thing that we've been taught for so long as therapists is, okay, let me open a group practice. And this is one thing I see from people with kind of this idea like, oh, I want to be making more money. And I get that, but I often will say to people, well, do you want to run a team of employees? Because that's what it is. And then
Mhm.
they'll say, no, of course I don't want to do that, or maybe not, some people do, or do you want to mentor, or do you want to really spend the time to dedicate to running a group? And then a lot of times people won't. And so then we'll talk through some other alternatives of other ways they can make money or expand their reach and that sort of thing. So that's usually the kind of the first place that I see people asking this question. Do you see that? Do you find that a lot of times people will go right to wanting to open a group practice?
Yeah, I think the way that we kind of teach it is that if you want to open a group practice, that's the low hanging fruit if you're into that.
Mhm.
That you already have most of those systems already set up, and that we kind of segment out the audience building, which I think you kind of frame it as like digital products or digital image,
Mhm.
with the idea that to build your audience, you have to have an audience before, in our opinion, you need to have an audience before you start just like making e-courses. Like I think the big
Yeah,
trap a lot of people do is they'll spend 5 or 10 grand recording this beautiful e-course, have a whole launch
right.
sequence, and then 2 people buy it. Whereas like we've found that if you can survey the audience, say, here's what we're thinking, say you want to do a 9-part e-course, but then people say, hey, we actually want like live training and then a retreat. It's like,
Right.
unless you talk to your audience, you're not going to know that. And so usually if someone's into a group practice, even if you're adding a couple part-time people, that seems like a pretty easy way to keep the momentum going. But then I think there are people that say, I know I don't want a group practice, and you need to go into it kind of in a serious way of thinking. Like, do you want to be the clinician? Do you want to be the owner, or do you want to be the operator? Do you want to be all three? Do you want to be just two of those? If so, then we're talking about some of your profit disappearing because you're paying for an operator or you're paying for, a clinical director. And that's fine if you don't want to do that, but just recognize there's going to be a cost in that where instead of 25% take home, you're getting 8%.
Yeah. No,
How do you guys think
absolutely.
through that
Through the question of the group
of
of
starting
like,
a group practice?
I think I come at it mostly from the lens first of really asking them what's your motivation behind it. Because oftentimes what I find is that people want more time. They want more time with their kids or their families. And so first we kind of talk about, first of all, how much more time do you want? And are you going to get that through having a group? And if you are, we need to think strategically through it. So, kind of like you're saying, if they start a group and then they end up hiring a clinical director, how are they paying that person? And we talk a little bit about, okay, let's say you bring on an associate and they don't have clients right away. So, you still going to be paying that clinical director or supervisor? And really kind of trying to get into the numbers of it first, in terms of like how profitable are they actually going to be or not. And then really also looking at their overflow of referrals from the beginning, because people will say to me, like, well, I'm getting a couple overflow referrals a month. And we kind of look at like, is that enough to fill somebody up if they don't have any marketing skills of their own? And if they, are you ready kind of to train somebody to bring in some of their own clients too, is a big question we kind of will go over.
Yeah. Listen, I didn't take insurance in my counseling practice because I had no idea how to handle it. The process of accepting insurance outside of a group practice can be tough, but most people looking for mental health care want to use their benefits to pay for sessions. If you're like me and you feel a little scared about taking insurance or you just want to make it easier on yourself and you're interested in seeing clients through insurance, Alma can help. They make it easy to get credentialed with major insurance plans at enhanced reimbursement rates. They also handle all the paperwork from eligibility checks to claim submission and guaranteed payment within 2 weeks. Plus, when you join Alma, you'll get access to time-saving tools for intake, scheduling, treatment plans, progress notes, and more in their included platform. It's going to make it so much easier for your team, so you can spend less time on administrative work and more time offering great care to your clients. Visit helloalma.com/Joe. That's helloalma.com/Joe to get started. How do you think through marketing with them?
I think there's kind of two schools of thought here, or the way I think about it is the idea of, are you going to be sending them clients with the expectation that they're not going to market themselves? In which case, maybe the amount that you're paying somebody is going to be less because they don't have to bring in their own clients. Or are you going to expect that they learn how to do some marketing and they go out and do some marketing, but then you're not going to be bringing in as many of their own clients, or not be giving them as many clients, and therefore maybe not taking home as much? So that's kind of the first question we go through. And depending on how they answer, then we're going to talk through their marketing more. So I know some group practices where they say, you know what, I'm going to be giving people clients. I want them to all kind of be under quote unquote my own brand. I don't want them to have their own website. I want to be, getting out in the community. And then I'll work with the owner and saying, okay, well, what do you need to do in terms of your search engine optimization, in terms of how you're promoting the values of the group, what the group offers as a whole, collaboration with the group. And then I'll have group practice owners who will say, no, like, actually, I want them to do their own marketing. So then we're talking more about teaching them how to teach marketing to their associates or interns, or depending on the state that they're in. And I think that the jumping off point is kind of right there in terms of how they want to approach it with their team.
Yeah. Yeah. We use a like when to hire calculator we put together that
Awesome.
I mean, it's just like basic math, like similar to what you're
Yeah.
talking about, where how many referrals are you getting per week, how many of those convert into an intake, how many of those are long term, how many sessions do they come to at what amount and percentage, and then you can kind of forecast like how many weeks it should take to get someone full. And I think for most people they're like, oh, that's going to take a really long time if I don't do any new marketing. And so understanding that big decision of starting a group, you do have to amp up some of those other dials of, we need more referrals, we need to have a bigger reach if we're going to try to fill this person up.
Yeah. And then I think that begs the second question of how long is that person going to stay? So sometimes people will tell me, like, I want to hire a pre-licensed therapist because I think that they, might stay a little bit longer, and then they can maybe pay them a little bit less. But sometimes I'll remind people it might be better to hire somebody who's licensed, who's really looking to stay in the long term, rather than this being kind of the next launching off point. And because that can be tricky too. You fill somebody up and then they leave.
Yeah. Well, I'm wondering, because you're still practicing and you're also doing consulting and teaching and doing so many different things with your community. Um, how do you think through where you're going to spend your time?
Oh, Joe, this is the problem of my life currently. And I have two really young kids too. So I have an 18-month-old and a 4-year-old.
Oh,
Um,
you're in the thick of it.
yes. And also my husband is a psychiatrist who is not in private practice, who takes insurance, who works for a group. Um, so he sees a lot of clients every single week and has a long waiting list. And, so we are in it, let me tell you. And it's a tough balance. I've always really been adamant about staying working clinically, even as my business has grown with consulting. I think it's always been nice to kind of keep my feet wet and just, there's something really grounding for me about working with clients, and especially because I work with teenagers. So it's like a total different side of my brain. And I love so many of just the energy that working with young people brings for me, especially as somebody who has young kids too. It's fun to sit with a teenager after taking a 4-year-old to preschool and having him beg for snacks all morning. And the balance is, I would say I have terrible balance. So
Mm.
I'm up around 4:30 and I work from about 4:30 to 6 in the morning before everyone else is awake in my house. And that's really the time when I'm working on Private Practice Pro. I answer emails. Sometimes I'll record courses and videos really early. So sometimes when people are in my courses, I'm like, if you look, try not to look out the window, it's still dark. And then the morning is when I typically will see clients. That's been complicated because I see teens. So I've seen more college students lately in order to make this kind of schedule work. Then in the midday, again, I'll do a little bit more work on Private Practice Pro. And then I'm really get into mom mode at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. It's like, for us, my husband works and still sees clients into the evening. And so I'm on mom duty for every afternoon of the week, which has been, such a nice opportunity of being a therapist and a consultant, to be able to have that time with my kids. And it's a boundary I have to really hold with myself, because it would be easy for me to not. I love to work. So it's a balance. And I feel like I'm constantly wearing many hats, and to be honest with you, constantly like, uh-oh, like this morning, my car battery died, and I knew I was coming on today, and I had a client before this, and I was like, I got to figure out how this is going to go down. So it's
Oh,
it's
so
not always
it
easy.
is so relentless sometimes being an adult. It's like
It
insane.
is. Yeah. It is.
So we often on here talk about hard boundaries and soft boundaries. And so hard boundaries being the things that you're like, I don't do that. So for example, I wrote Thursday is the new Friday. It's about having a 4-day work week. So I would never
Yeah.
take on a consulting client long term on a Friday. That would just go against everything I've been teaching. Whereas if my business is on fire on a Friday and one of my assistants texts me and says, we need you to jump in, like I'm not going to be like, sorry, I have a 3-day weekend. And maybe a soft boundary might be something that I'm testing or moving into. So it could be that I'm going to test not even checking Slack until 10 a.m. To just see if my morning feels different than not. And so, do you have any soft boundaries that you're testing out, or any hard boundaries that you're like, I never check, I turn off my notifications on Instagram, after 3, or anything like that that's been helpful for you?
Yeah, I think the biggest one for me is I don't get any notifications from anything except for text message, and I've had it that way for quite a while. And also with that, I turned off the vibrate on my phone, so the only time my phone actually rings is if it's a number of my husband, my dad, somebody related to my kids' school. So the only numbers that ring through that are not on silent are the numbers that have to ring through, which is like 10 people tops. And then I don't get any social media notifications, everything. So that in and of itself, just my nervous system, like, whew, it's like my team, my inner circle. And then, the second boundary I have is I do have an admin team now. And we're very, 90% of email goes through them for me at this point, so that I'm really only responding to my clients, or people that are on my team rather than like inquiries and things like that. And then I would say the last thing I did a couple of years ago was I put an away message on my email that I think a lot of people would think is kind of wild. So on, especially my consulting email and my therapy email, it's a little different because I'm working, directly with clients. But on my consulting email, I have a response that basically says, I'm a mom of young kids and my goal is to be present with them. And I answer emails within 3 to 5 days. And I originally put it up during my first maternity leave, which at this point was almost 5 years ago. My son's birthday is this week. But it stayed up there. And, I get so many emails back from people being like, wow, I'm so, like, thank you. This was a great example for me as a parent and that sort of thing. So those have been kind of my hard boundaries. And soft boundaries, I don't know. That's a
Mm.
hard one. The
Well, I love
afternoon
that.
is still the one where I'm working on it, I guess.
Yeah, I
Sorry.
think I think for me, just understanding like what for this phase of parenting, like my kids are 10 and 13 right now, like what's needed. And so, I mean, we are in, oh man, volleyball is just wrapping up. Soon we're gonna have like tennis and lacrosse, and my other daughter has improv. It's just like so much. And so making sure that I block those things out and, walk my 10-year-old to school each day, which means that I don't start till 9:30 and I'm always done at 3:30. And so I think that just kind of having those boundaries for myself for this phase of parenting that, in just a couple of years, my 13-year-old is going to be like doing her own thing even before she's 18. So it's like really, kind of savoring this time as much as I can, even with all the stress.
Totally. I try to remind, it makes me want to like tear up even now. Like I really try to remind myself I won't get these years back, and so when I pick up my kids at 3:30, oftentimes, I mean, there's not a day that goes by where I use Notion. So where I'm not looking at my Notion or Slack or whatever you use, thinking like, oh gosh, there are about 15 other things that I probably need to do today. But I feel lucky that I'm the one who gets to pick them up, and so could I have him stay till 5? Yeah, and no judgment on anyone who does. Like, I totally get it. But for me, I've been like, okay, like this is what I want, even though I lie awake at night thinking there are things that are not going to get done today. And it'll eat me a little bit. I'm not certainly not in a totally evolved human where I'm thinking like, oh, I can let it go. There are definitely opportunities that I say no to all the time so that I have more time with my kids.
Hmm. Well, the last question I always ask is if every private practitioner in the world were listening right now, what would you want them to know?
Yeah, you even told me you were going to ask this question, and I still don't know. No, I do. I think just for career in general, I think so often as therapists, there are so many messages that come into us, whether it's from other therapists or our families or the world, saying about trying to explain what it's like to be a therapist or tell you how to be a therapist. And I think one of the greatest gifts of this career is, besides getting to work with people during some of the most challenging times of their lives and being witness to that, and the honor of that alone, I think the secondary part is that you get to build the career that you want. And the more you can put the blinders on and just really focus on what's going to work for you and your family and your values, the better.
So good. Kelley, if people want to connect with you, follow you, where should we send them?
If they want to connect with me, follow me. I am on all the things, all the social media platforms, YouTube, TikTok, Instagram is my main home, but on all of them, I'm at the Private Practice Pro. Same with my website. You can find me there. And I always love connecting with other therapists. It's one of the joys of my life. So always happy to connect.
So awesome. Well, thank you so much for being on the show today.
Yeah.
I mean, talk about juggling. Man, Kelley was so honest with us about just family life and boundaries and working on so many different things. Loved this conversation today. If you want to have conversations like this, you definitely should be a part of our membership community. Over at practiceofthepractice.com/membership, we have multiple tracks. We have our next level practice track. That's for people just getting going. We have sustainable solo practice. That's if you have a solo and you're not leveling into group. If you want to start a group, we have the group practice launch track. And then if you're in a group, we have group practice boss. And if you're building some digital content, like we talked about today, we have audience building academy. All those are included in one price over at practiceofthepractice.com/membership. You can read more about that. Thank you so much to Alma for being our sponsor today. I wish Alma had been around when I had my private practice. I had no idea what I was doing. That's why I didn't take insurance. But if Alma had been there, I would have. And there's no reason that as a clinician, you should be spending hours on paperwork to bill for insurance, or not knowing for sure that you'll get reimbursed for sessions with your clients. If you're interested in seeing clients through insurance, but don't want to navigate the process and paperwork on your own, Alma can help. They make it easy to get credentialed with major insurance plans at enhanced reimbursement rates and a guaranteed payment within 2 weeks. Visit helloalma.com/Joe. That's hello, ALMA.com/Joe to get started. Thank you so much for letting me into your ears and into your brain. Have a great day. I'll talk to you soon. Special thanks to the band Silence is Sexy for that intro music, and this podcast is designed to provide accurate and authoritative information in regard to the subject matter covered. It is given with the understanding that neither the host, the producers, the publishers, or guests are rendering legal, accounting, clinical, or other professional information. If you want a professional, you should find one.